My husband was on the verge of marrying someone else for the sake of having a child, and desperation weighed heavily on my chest. Then my 25-year-old servant suggested a method that could change everything. At first, the very idea made my heart race, but circumstances cornered me into reluctantly agreeing. When he entered my room that evening, the sight of him stole the breath from my lungs. He had consumed a special kind of milk, and what happened next will leave you as astonished as it did me. Let me take you back to how this all began. Ramiz's words struck me like thunder on a calm night, unraveling my composure. Falling to my knees, I sobbed at his feet, but his eyes, cold as stone, revealed no mercy. "For how long am I supposed to live with a barren woman like you?" He spat, delivering a swift kick that knocked me backward. His voice dripped with resentment. "This mansion, the wealth, the vast lands we own in the village, none of it will matter if I don't have an heir. My brothers will take over everything." I trembled as his words sliced through me, each one deeper than the last. "I have to have a child, and you've cursed my life with your empty womb. I'm going to marry again no matter what." Before I could respond, he turned on his heel to leave. I scrambled after him, clutching at his feet. "Please, Ramiz, don't do this to me. For you, I left my home, my family, everything. I crossed my father's threshold with nothing but love for you in my heart, and now you're talking about leaving me just because I can't have a child." He looked down at me with such disgust that my soul nearly shattered. "If I had known you were barren, I would never have married you." "But it's not my fault," I cried. "It's destiny. We don't get to choose our fate. I still believe, no, I'm certain, God will bless me with a child." My pleas fell on deaf ears. With a long, calculated look, Ramiz finally spoke. "Fine, I'll give you 3 months. If you become pregnant within that time, I'll forget about marrying someone else. But if you don't," his voice darkened, "I'll divorce you and marry someone who can give me an heir." The echo of his retreating footsteps haunted me as I crumpled to the floor, my sobs suffocating me. I had never imagined that life would betray me like this, that the man I loved, the man who had once adored me, would speak of casting me aside so easily. As tears soaked the floor beneath me, I barely noticed when Gulray, my new servant, entered the room. His gaze fell on me and he hesitated. "Madam, is everything all right?" I turned to him, fury blazing in my eyes. "Get out! Stay in your place, servant! Mind your business!" He flinched as if struck and silently picked up a file from the table. Probably something Ramiz had asked for. Without another word, he left, closing the door softly behind him. I collapsed again, crying until my body had no strength left. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep right there on the cold floor. When I awoke, the sight of Gulrez startled me. He was sitting close to me, watching me intently. The moment my eyes opened, he scrambled back like a child caught misbehaving. Heart pounding, I sat up and demanded, "What are you doing here? Why were you so close to me?" Panic flooded his face as he stammered, "I'm sorry, madam. Please forgive me. I thought you had fainted. You didn't look well, and I was worried, so I came over to check on you," Gulrez said, his voice a mix of concern and apology. My anger flared instantly. "Don't you dare do that again," I warned, my voice trembling with frustration. "If Ramiz finds out, he won't just be angry, he'll kill you. He's very sensitive when it comes to me and wouldn't tolerate any man coming near me. Even if I'm dying, don't come close without permission." Gulrez took 2 hesitant steps back, nodding nervously. "I'm sorry, madam. I only came to ask if you'd like to eat something," he explained. My gaze sharpened as I snapped, "I'm not hungry. Go back to your duties and leave me alone." Without another word, Gulrez turned and quickly exited the room, shutting the door softly behind him. I exhaled and stood up, making my way to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would clear my mind and cool the fire burning in my chest. Once back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. After what felt like an eternity, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Ramiz slip away. I would become the woman he couldn't resist, fit, attractive, and ready to reignite the love we once shared. If I could remind him of the passion we had, maybe, just maybe, he would forget about a second marriage. I pulled out a stunning outfit from my wardrobe, one of Ramiz's favorites, and carefully selected matching jewelry to complement it. As the evening wore on, I prepared myself, each step driven by desperation. I wanted to look perfect. I wanted him to see me and remember why he fell in love with me. But as the night crept closer to midnight, the hours felt like daggers. Ramiz still hadn't come home. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since morning. The hunger was making me dizzy, and I could no longer wait. Reluctantly, I left my room and made my way to the kitchen. To my surprise, I found Gulrez there. He greeted me with a faint smile, one that seemed to carry genuine warmth. "Madam, would you like me to set the table for you?" I frowned, confused. "Why are you still here? It's nearly 11 p.m. Your shift ended at 10. Shouldn't you be in the servant quarters by now?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Gulrez shrugged, his tone sincere. "I knew you hadn't eaten today. Not breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I stayed back in case you needed something." His words caught me off guard. No one had ever shown me this level of care before. The other servants always completed their tasks and left promptly. But Gulrez, he had waited for me. His job was to wash the dishes, not serve meals, and yet here he was, waiting to ensure I didn't go hungry. For a moment, I felt a strange warmth spread through me, but I quickly shook it off. "All right," I muttered softly. "I'm hungry. Please set the table." Gulrez nodded and hurriedly warmed the food before arranging it neatly on the dining table. I sat down, still feeling weak from the day's emotional roller coaster. He stood silently to the side, watching me with a quiet vigilance. I glanced at him and said, "You can leave now. I'll clean up the dishes myself." But Gulrez shook his head. "I'll stay," he insisted, as if ensuring I was okay was more important than anything else. I ate slowly, my eyes drifting to the clock on the wall. Each passing minute made my heart sink further. Ramiz had never been this late before. The nagging question of where he could be gnawed at my mind until I could no longer bear it. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the screen. Gulrez remained nearby, his presence oddly comforting, but unnoticed, as I focused on the ringing phone. After several rings, someone finally answered, but it wasn't Ramiz. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman. My heart skipped a beat, and my grip on the phone tightened. "Hello? Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman chuckled softly before replying, "I'm Mr. Ramiz's secretary. He just stepped into the bathroom." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. "Where is he and why hasn't he come home yet?" I demanded, my voice rising. There was a brief pause, followed by an awkward silence. Then the secretary cleared her throat and said, "We're at a gathering at one of his friends' places. He brought me along, and once he drops me home, he'll head back to you. But it might take some time. His friends are still here, and the night is young." The room seemed to spin around me. My breath hitched, and my fingers trembled as I ended the call without saying another word. The implications of what I had just heard crashed down on me like a tidal wave. Ramiz wasn't with just anyone. He was with his secretary. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unbearable than the last. Was she the woman he intended to marry? Had he already made up his mind to replace me? I pushed the plate away and buried my face in my hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The tears came in waves, hot and relentless, as if they carried all the pain and betrayal I had been suppressing. Gulrez, still standing silently in the corner, took a hesitant step toward me. "Madam, are you okay?" he asked softly, but I couldn't respond. The image of Ramiz smiling and enjoying himself with another woman consumed me. My heart felt like it was being torn apart piece by piece. For years I had believed in the strength of our love. Now it felt like that love had been nothing more than a fragile illusion, shattered by the harsh reality I never wanted to face. Gulrez, who had been standing silently behind me, rushed over as soon as he saw the tears streaming down my face. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Madam, what's wrong? Please tell me. Is everything okay? You were crying like this earlier in the day too. Is the master all right?" His voice trembled slightly as he waited for my response. I said nothing, unable to find the strength to speak. My heart was a storm, raging with sorrow and despair. When I didn't answer, Gulrez hesitated before softly continuing, Madam, every household has its share of arguments. There's no need to be so worried. Things have a way of working out on their own. I shook my head vehemently, tears dripping onto the table. Nothing will be fine, Gulrez, I whispered, my voice breaking. My husband has made up his mind to bring another woman into this house, a second wife. The weight of my words settled heavily between us, and I realized with a jolt that I had just confessed something I never thought I could share with anyone. Between sobs, I let it all out. I can't have children, Gulrez. I'm barren. That's why my husband is planning to marry someone else. Shock widened his eyes, but he quickly regained composure and ran to get a glass of water. He handed it to me with trembling hands. Madam, don't lose hope. There's a solution to every problem. You never know when things might turn around, he said gently. I took a small sip of water and leaned back against the chair, defeated. I've tried everything, Gulrez. I've been to every major hospital in the city. I've seen the best doctors, but they all say the same thing. There's no medical problem, no condition that can be treated. They say that only God's will can bless me with a child, and until then, there's nothing anyone can do. I covered my face with my hands. But how do I make Ramiz understand that? He doesn't care about God's timing. He wants a child now, and if I can't give him one, he's ready to replace me with someone who can. My tears flowed again, uncontrollably. Gulrez's gaze softened as he watched me. You love him so much. You take such good care of him, and yet he's willing to do this to you, he asked, disbelief coloring his tone. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to suppress the pain threatening to consume me. You have no idea how much I love him, Gulrez. I've crossed every limit, broken every boundary for him. I gave up everything I had to be with him. If he leaves me now, I won't survive. I have nowhere else to go. Gulrez knelt at my feet, his face filled with genuine concern. What about your family, madam? Can't they help you? The mention of my family unleashed a new wave of tears. Memories of my past flashed before my eyes, each one more bittersweet than the last. I was my parents' only daughter, the apple of their eye. They loved me more than anything in the world and sacrificed their own dreams to fulfill mine. They enrolled me in the best school in the city and never once let me feel the weight of our middle-class background. I still remember how my father would fulfill my every wish without a second thought. Whether it was a new dress, a school trip, or a book I wanted, my father never said no. He believed in giving me the best life possible, and for that, he worked tirelessly. But that was who he was, a man who valued his daughter's happiness above everything else. When I grew older, they sent me to the most prestigious college in the city. That's where my life took a turn. It was at that college where I first met Ramiz. Ramiz wasn't a student there. He would often wait outside the college gates, leaning casually against his sleek black car. He wasn't just another young man trying to impress girls. He was different. His presence was magnetic, his dark eyes captivating, and his sophisticated style irresistible. The moment he saw me, he made it his mission to win my heart. At first I ignored him, thinking he was just another rich boy looking for a thrill. But Ramiz was persistent. Day after day he would be there, waiting for a glimpse of me. Eventually his charm worked its magic, and I found myself falling for him. He confessed his love repeatedly, and before I knew it, I was head over heels for him. It wasn't long before I asked him to send a marriage proposal to my family. I was sure my parents would understand and accept him because, to me, he was perfect. But to my shock, my father flatly refused. His disapproval shook me to my core. No matter how much I pleaded and explained that I loved Ramiz, my father remained firm in his decision. He's the son of a wealthy landlord, my father had said, his voice heavy with concern. Rich men like him don't stay committed to one woman for long. Their lives are full of temptations, and they have the means to indulge in them. I don't want you to end up heartbroken. But I couldn't listen. My love for Ramiz blinded me to all the warnings my father had given me. I believed that Ramiz was different, that his love for me was genuine and unbreakable. I fought with my family, defied their wishes, and ultimately left my home to marry him. And now, here I was, on the verge of losing the man I had given up everything for. My dear, every man in that family is the same, my father had said, his voice firm and unyielding, especially those who come from wealthy backgrounds like his. They don't value their wives the way you think they do. If they tire of one, they replace her without a second thought. Ramiz will marry someone from his family. That much is certain. And once that's done, who knows how many more wives he'll take outside the family. I had sat there stunned, unable to comprehend his words. But that's not necessary, Abba, I argued, desperation lacing my voice. Not every man is like that. I know Ramiz is rich, and yes, he comes from a powerful family, but he loves me. Isn't that what matters? My father had smiled, but it was a smile filled with the wisdom of experience. You don't understand their ways. The elders in his family ensure that their sons marry within the family, whether you know it or not. One day, when you find yourself replaced, you'll remember my words, and by then, it will be too late to undo the damage. Despite my father's warnings, he refused to approve of my relationship with Ramiz. His rejection had devastated me, and when Ramiz found out, he was furious. I will marry only you, he declared. There's no one in my family waiting to marry me, and there never will be. You're the only woman I want to be my wife. His determination had fueled my own. I made up my mind. I would marry Ramiz, no matter the cost. And so, without my family's approval, we had a court marriage. It was the ultimate betrayal to my father, the man who had loved me beyond measure. I had driven a dagger straight into his heart. After the marriage, I went back to face my father, hoping for his forgiveness. But his response had shattered me. You are no longer my daughter, he said coldly. The shame I had brought upon the family was too much for him to bear. The entire neighborhood knew that I had been missing for 4 days. 4 days that I had spent with Ramiz, hidden away from the world. Ramiz had refused to let me return home sooner, fearing that my father would find a way to separate us. When I finally stood at my father's doorstep, it was too late. My parents had already faced the brunt of society's harsh judgment. With tears in my eyes, I had begged for forgiveness. But my father had pushed me away. Leave this house, he said, his voice filled with pain and anger. You no longer have a place here. That day I lost my family forever. But Ramiz had been my savior. He gave me all the love and affection I had longed for. Our relationship flourished, and for a time I believed that everything would be fine. Yes, I missed my parents terribly, but Ramiz always found a way to distract me, to make me smile again. I convinced myself that his love was all I needed to fill the void in my heart. For a while it worked, but then Ramiz started demanding something I couldn't give him. A child. His desire for an heir became an obsession. At first it was subtle. He would mention it during conversations, ask me about doctors and treatments. But as time went on, his impatience grew. A year passed and still I wasn't pregnant. That's when the pressure intensified. I need a child, he would say, over and over again. No matter how many times I told him that it wasn't within my control, he refused to listen. He became distant, cold, and relentless. And now he had given me an ultimatum. Either I conceive within 3 months, or he would divorce me and marry someone else. Tears streamed down my face as I relayed my story to Gulrez, who sat silently, listening with empathy. His eyes reflected the weight of my pain. When I finally finished, he spoke softly. Madam, there might be a solution to this problem. If you trust me, I believe I can help you. I blinked, startled by his words. What do you mean, Gulrez? Tell me, I'll do anything, I whispered desperately. I visited countless doctors, tried every prayer and sought help from spiritual healers. Nothing has worked. Gulrez leaned in slightly, his gaze steady. Leave it to me, madam. I will solve this problem for you, and soon you will have the happiness you seek. Before I could question him further, the sound of a car horn echoed through the house. Ramiz was home. Gulrez quickly gathered the dishes and retreated to the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wiped my tears and made my way to the bedroom. A few moments later, Ramiz entered the room. He looked exhausted, but strangely happy. He tossed his coat onto the bed and began humming a tune as he removed his shoes. His carefree demeanor only fueled the storm brewing within me. I couldn't hold back any longer. I walked up to him and asked, "Where were you? I called you earlier and your secretary answered the phone." Ramiz's expression darkened as he shot me a warning glance. "Stop spying on me," he said sharply. "If you want to do something useful, give me the one thing I actually need, a child." With a frustrated sigh, Ramiz tossed his shoe into the air. It landed with a dull thud across the room before he disappeared into the bathroom. I stood frozen, feeling as though his shoe had hit my heart instead. It was clear now. Whenever I asked him anything, his only response was to demand a child. That had become the sole focus of our conversations, and every time he mentioned it, the weight of my failure crushed me further. That night, Ramiz slept soundly, but I couldn't close my eyes for even a moment. I tossed and turned, my thoughts racing like a storm in my head. What would happen next? Would Ramiz really marry his secretary? Or would he find someone else to bring into our home as his second wife? The possibilities tormented me. And what if, along with marrying someone else, he divorced me too? Where would I go? What would become of me? My mind spiraled into darker thoughts as the hours dragged by. Dawn arrived, and sunlight streamed through the windows, but it brought me no comfort. I waited anxiously for Ramiz to leave for work, so I could finally speak to Gulrez and learn about the solution he had hinted at the night before. Around noon, Ramiz left the house, heading to his office. As soon as I saw his car disappear down the driveway, I hurried to find Gulrez. He was in the backyard, tending to some chores. Breathless and desperate, I grabbed his arm. "Tell me the way," I pleaded. "Tell me how I can become a mother." Gulrez smiled faintly, wiping his hands on a cloth before turning to face me fully. "Madam, you'll need to wait until tonight," he said softly. "Your husband won't be home, and that's when we can talk freely without anyone overhearing. There are too many servants around right now, and most of them are loyal to the master. If anyone finds out, it could cause serious trouble." His words sent a shiver down my spine. He was right. The other servants had been with Ramiz's family for years, most of them hailing from his village. They were fiercely loyal and wouldn't hesitate to inform him if they saw anything suspicious. Ramiz was possessive, and the very idea of another man being near me could push him into a fit of rage. Nodding reluctantly, I backed away. "I understand," I whispered. "I'll wait." I returned to my room and waited anxiously for night to fall. Ramiz had already informed me that he wouldn't be back until the next morning, so I was alone in the house except for the staff. As the clock struck 11 p.m., I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart raced as I opened it to find Gulrez standing there, holding 2 glasses of milk. His presence surprised me, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. He handed me one of the glasses and lifted the other to his lips, drinking it in one long gulp. As I watched, his demeanor began to change. His body tensed, and his eyes took on a glassy, unfocused look. "Madam, you should drink yours too," he said, his voice low and thick. I shook my head, stepping back. "No, Gulrez, I didn't call you here for this. I want you to tell me the solution, the method that will help me have a child," I insisted. He raised a finger to his lips, signaling me to be quiet. Then he walked over to the door, locked it, and returned to sit beside me. His closeness made me uneasy, but the desperation in my heart overpowered my discomfort. He leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Madam, there's something very important I need to tell you," but I didn't have the courage to say it while fully conscious. "That's why I drank this milk mixed with bong. Now I can speak the truth." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling in my lap. "What truth, Gulrez? What is it?" I asked, my voice cracking. He took a deep breath, his gaze locked on mine. "The problem isn't with you, madam. The issue lies with your husband." His words hit me like a thunderclap. For a moment, I couldn't process what he had just said. My breath hitched, and I leaned back against the cushions, trying to steady myself. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to whisper. Gulrez's expression was serious, his eyes filled with sympathy. I've worked in this house long enough to notice things, he explained. I've overheard conversations, seen the subtle signs. Your husband knows that he is the reason you haven't been able to conceive, but he's hiding it from you. Instead, he's blaming you and using it as an excuse to marry someone else. The room spun around me as I tried to comprehend the gravity of his revelation. That can't be true, I muttered, shaking my head in disbelief. Why would Ramiz hide something like that from me? Why would he let me suffer this way? Because he's too proud, Gulrez said softly. Admitting that the fault lies with him would shatter his ego. It's easier for him to blame you and seek another woman than to face the truth. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision. All this time I had believed that I was the one at fault, that I was broken. I had endured the pain of being called barren, of being threatened with divorce, and all along Ramiz had been the one with the problem. I covered my face with my hands, sobbing uncontrollably. What do I do now, Gulrez? I asked, my voice muffled by my tears. How do I confront him? How do I fix this? Gulrez placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Madam, you have to be strong. This isn't your burden to carry alone. But first, you need to decide. Do you want to fight for your marriage, or is it time to walk away? I belong to your husband's village, Gulrez admitted, his voice calm, yet filled with guilt. But I'm not actually his servant. I'm a trusted employee of his eldest brother. I was sent here with one mission, to create conflict between you and your husband. When Ramiz married you against the family's wishes, it caused a huge scandal back in the village. His refusal to marry a girl from the family only added fuel to the fire. His brothers were furious and cut ties with him, but they secretly wanted him back because of the shared inheritance and farmland. The family couldn't afford a long-term rift. He paused, looking at me with regret. They tried for a long time to convince Ramiz to leave you and marry someone from the family. But when he refused, they sent me. I was young and good-looking, and they thought that if I could win you over, Ramiz would be so insulted that he'd divorce you without a second thought. After all, he's a man of pride. My body stiffened as I listened, my breath coming in short gasps. So you were sent here to destroy my marriage? I whispered. Yes, Gulrez admitted, his eyes full of remorse. But when I came here and saw you crying, saw the turmoil in your life, I realized that things weren't the way they had described. They had told me stories of a loving and perfect relationship between you two. But what I found was something else entirely. The misunderstandings, the blame, the sadness. It shook me. And yesterday, when you told me everything about your struggle, I realized just how cruel this plan really was. He lowered his head and continued. I began to hate what I was doing. The thought of being the reason for a divorce, the reason you would be left with no place to go, it terrified me. You had already been disowned by your family. If I caused you to lose this home too, where would you end up? I couldn't bear that thought. That's when I decided to come clean and tell you the truth. Tears streamed down my face as I heard the depth of his confession. But how does that explain why I couldn't have a child? I asked. Gulrez took a deep breath. The reason you haven't been able to conceive is because of the medicine I've been giving your husband, he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. I was instructed to mix a special drug into his milk every day. It temporarily prevents fertility. Your husband doesn't know this, and neither did you. I've carried this burden for too long, and I'm asking for your forgiveness. I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. The realization that my inability to conceive had been orchestrated, manipulated by people who wanted to see my marriage fall apart, left me speechless. So all this time, it wasn't my fault? I whispered, more to myself than to him. All this suffering, the blame, the threats of divorce, it wasn't because of me? Gulrez nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. I'm truly sorry, madam. I was forced to do this by the very people I served. But now I won't give Ramiz that medicine anymore. I've confessed my sin to you because I couldn't carry this guilt any longer. You can choose to punish me, or you can forgive me. But you need to know one thing. Ramiz's family won't stop. They'll find another way to separate you two if you don't protect your marriage. I wiped my tears and stood tall. Then you have to do one more thing for me, Gorez. You need to confess everything to Ramiz. Tell him the truth. Once he knows, we can confront his family together. I need this nightmare to end once and for all. Gorez hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. I'll do it, he said. For you. The next morning, when Ramiz returned home, Gulrez came forward and revealed everything. He spoke with complete honesty, sparing no detail. Ramiz listened in stunned silence, his face pale with shock. When Gulrez finished, Ramiz looked at me, guilt and pain reflecting in his eyes. He walked over and pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I've been so unfair to you. For the first time in months, I felt like the man I had fallen in love with was back. Ramiz's anger wasn't directed at me anymore. It was aimed at his brothers. He stormed out of the house and confronted them, demanding answers and severing ties with those who had betrayed him. Gulrez, who could no longer return to Ramiz's brother's service, was offered a permanent job by Ramiz himself. You helped save my marriage, Ramiz told him. I owe you that much. 2 months later, the miracle I had prayed for finally arrived. I found out that I was pregnant. The joy was overwhelming, and I couldn't hold back my tears as I thanked God for this blessing. I knew that it wasn't just the absence of the medicine that had made this possible. It was destiny, aligning at just the right time. With the news of my pregnancy, I made another important decision. I returned to my parents' home, hoping that they would forgive me. To my surprise, they embraced me with open arms. My father's eyes were wet with tears as he said, "We missed you every day, but we were too proud to admit it." I apologized profusely, acknowledging my mistakes and vowing to rebuild the bond I had broken. That day, my family was reunited, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. As I look back on everything, I realized that Gulrez played a crucial role in saving my life. Without his intervention, I might never have uncovered the truth, never reunited with my family, and never experienced the joy of becoming a mother. He changed the course of my destiny. Ramiz and I have healed from the wounds of the past, and I have forgiven him, just as I have forgiven Gulrez. Today, my life is complete. I have my husband, my child, and my family. The journey was painful, but it taught me the value of resilience, forgiveness, and love. If you've ever felt lost or trapped by circumstances beyond your control, know that hope exists even in the darkest moments. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story could be the light someone else needs.